They say some projects are so dangerous to humanity that they are never allowed to be completed. Like in 1969, a machine was designed that was not on Earth, but an entire empire settled in the sky. An airplane, powered by a nuclear reactor, and lived in the winds like an entire city. Fighter jets would take off and land on it, just like today's aircraft carriers, and it would embrace an entire war in its arms. This aircraft was not an ordinary aircraft. It was the aircraft that the world today knows by the name Lockheed CL-1201. It was 1969 when the Cold War was at its peak. The world was divided into two parts, with an atmosphere of fear and suspicion everywhere. In the 1960s, breathtaking progress was seen in the field of space technology. Aircraft were flying faster, higher, and farther. And engineers were not only pushing the limits of speed forward, but were also making aircraft sizes larger. The newly developed Lockheed C-5, a huge machine weighing several hundred tons, had already shaken the world with its power and range. But assuming that aircraft could be many times larger than this was not unrealistic either. Much of the rapid development was fueled by the Cold War. America and the Soviet Union were spending huge amounts of money developing spy planes that could fly faster and higher, and bombers that could carry more bombs and ammunition farther. The goal was to make reaching any corner of the world as quickly as possible. To counter Soviet power expansion, America had maintained a containment strategy. This meant maintaining a vast navy of carrier battle groups that could respond to any crisis anywhere in the world. But as the Cold War intensified in the 1960s, no corner of the world seemed safe from provocation. For rapid and decisive response, America turned to new technologies. By the 1960s, Lockheed California Company was producing the world's most advanced aircraft, pushing the technology of that time to its ultimate limits. They had continued working with the Navy and Air Force to evaluate new technologies and develop the next generation of military aircraft, most of which was kept extremely secret. Then, in 1969, the company presented an extraordinary study that seems strange even in its most advanced research. It contained details of an aircraft with terrifying proportions, approximately 6,000 tons and 1,100 feet wingspan, that was to serve as both military transportation and aircraft carrier. With payload capacity measured in millions of pounds, the Lockheed CL-1201 represented an entirely new class of aircraft. It would provide America with the capability to deploy several hundred fully equipped soldiers and weapons anywhere in the world within hours, or could launch dozens of heavily armed fighter aircraft at a moment's notice. Lockheed's engineers had described a frightening scenario where these capabilities would be extremely important for America. They envisioned an organized rebellion on the completely opposite side of the world, instigated by the Soviet Union. In response to a call for help, America would typically deploy a carrier group and Marines to help stabilize the situation. But in Lockheed's scenario, the Mediterranean would be closed and nearby foreign bases would not be available. So the 1201 would provide the only means of rapid attack, with large forces launched directly from continental America. Within hours of receiving a call for help, an attack carrier would be sent from an airfield in Georgia to an aerial staging area above the Mediterranean, equipped with 24 aircraft and long-range cruise missiles, establishing carrier role and air superiority. Simultaneously, 7 logistics support aircraft would also be sent to meet the carrier above the Mediterranean. Logistics support aircraft, or LSAs, were very large air transports, each capable of carrying 400 combat-ready soldiers, 472 specialized crew, and over 1,000 tons of machinery, weapons, and supplies sufficient for 30 days. But there was a problem here. Because the size of this aircraft was so large that the wing size was 1,100 feet, and the length was also more than 1,100 feet. For an aircraft of this size, the runway would also have to be very large, which would be more than 3 football field sizes. So engineers proposed a new solution to this problem. For maximum operational flexibility, the carrier and LSAs would be fully equipped for short takeoff and landings. Dozens of auxiliary turbofan engines would be placed in the wings and forward fuselage, each capable of providing an impressive 82,000 pounds of vertical thrust. 4 very large main engines would be mounted at the rear of the CL-1201, which would push it forward. But for takeoff and landing, dozens of small vertical lift engines would be spread throughout the aircraft's body, some in the wings, some in the upper section. These engines would give it the ability to go up and down like a helicopter. This aircraft was so large that if it passed over a city, its shadow would cover several blocks. Its thickness would be approximately 100 feet, meaning as tall as a 10-story building. Inside would be several decks: upper deck for flight operations, middle decks with crew living quarters, control centers, workshops, and below cargo holds and fuel tanks. The most amazing thing was that it could remain in the air for 30 days without landing on the ground. Inside, it would have a complete, self-sufficient city, food supplies, water purification system, medical facilities, and even recreational areas. The crew could live a normal life inside it while it kept flying in the sky. But after reaching the staging area, the carrier and LSAs would need to loiter for extended periods, staying in the air continuously for 30 days. So Lockheed's engineers had turned to another unconventional solution. At the heart of each CL-1201 was a 30-foot diameter, 18,000 megawatt nuclear reactor, similar to, but much larger than those used in nuclear submarines. The Air Force and Atomic Energy Commission had tested systems for nuclear-powered aircraft engines for decades, and these technologies were finally to emerge. During takeoff and landing, the 1201's cruise engines would run on standard jet fuel, and only above 16,000 feet would they be switched to nuclear power. Each engine was equipped with heat exchanger and could work on both jet fuel or heat coming from the reactor. Both coolant loops, inside and outside the containment vessel, would transfer heat from the reactor core while safely containing radioactive material. Radiation exposure would be limited by shielding, and the reactor's containment vessel would be placed inside a shock-absorbing structure. The minimum altitude of 16,000 feet for nuclear-powered operations was selected on the basis that in case of an accident, there would be sufficient time to shut down the reactor. Engineers were confident that the reactor would be fail-safe, even considered safe when crashing head-first into a granite mountain, provided there was a 20-second shutdown warning beforehand. Along with the carrier and LSAs, several conventional jet transports would also head toward the staging area to support the attacking force. Above the staging area, LSAs would be joined by small military transport aircraft called medium inter-theater transports, or MITs. MITs would meet with LSAs, docking in air for transfer of soldiers, weapons, and equipment. MITs would then connect to LSAs via tow line and remain on standby. The 1201's blended wing design made it an ideal platform for in-air docking and transfer. But what would it actually look like? This was not an ordinary aircraft carrier floating on the sea, because this was an entire city flying in the air. The shape of the CL-1201 was completely unique. Its blended wing body design meant there was no clear distinction between wings and body. Rather, it was a very large, flat, triangular-shaped aircraft. Imagine a very large boomerang, but much thicker and wider. Its length was approximately 1,120 feet, equivalent to 3.5 football fields, and width was 1,100 feet. It was approximately square-shaped. Actually, it was a flying airbase. The attack carrier variant could accommodate 24 fighter aircraft, and these aircraft would be parked on the deck located on its upper section, just like maritime aircraft carriers. But the difference was that all this would be happening at 30,000 feet altitude. The upper deck would have runway and hangar deck, where aircraft would be safely kept and repaired. LSA, Logistics Support Aircraft, variants would have 400 soldiers and all their equipment instead of aircraft. This would be a very large cargo hall inside. Imagine space equivalent to several football fields, filled with tanks, trucks, ammunition, and every kind of military equipment. The most interesting thing was how it would connect with other smaller aircraft. MIT, Medium Intertheater Transport, aircraft would come toward the bottom of the CL-1201 and dock. For this, special docking ports would be built in the belly of the CL-1201. Like those in space stations, MIT aircraft would connect to the CL-1201 via tow cable, and then transfer of soldiers and equipment would begin. This was exactly like in-air refueling, but instead, people and equipment would be transferred. The nuclear reactor would be placed right in the center of the CL-1201, in the thick section. This would be a very large metallic round room of approximately 30 feet diameter, covered with special radiation shielding. Around it would be crew quarters, control rooms, and other necessary facilities. If you have ever seen modern aircraft carriers, they look like floating cities in the sea. But CL-1201 would be even more impressive because all this would be in the air. At night, when its lights would shine, it would look like a flying city in the sky. To those looking from below, it would seem like some UFO suspended in the sky. Flight deck aircraft operations would be exactly like carrier, takeoff from catapult, landing with arresting wires, and deck crew working like uniformed sailors. But all this would be happening miles up in the sky, while this entire platform would be continuously moving forward, working with Allied forces on the ground. Carrier-based attacking aircraft would clear enemy defenses to establish a secure airfield. After this, MITs would begin transferring soldiers and equipment between LSAs and the airfield under the protection of carrier-based fighter aircraft. Such large aircraft would be high-value targets, but Lockheed's engineers did not expect opponents to be able to get close to them. Operating at 30,000 feet and at least 600 nautical miles away from enemy forces, it would be nearly impossible for the enemy to approach undetected. But if the enemy tried to engage, they would have to deal with counter-air aircraft, long and short-range missiles, and certainly an impressive range of laser weapons. After establishing a large presence on the ground, American forces could stabilize the situation within 30 days, working with Allied forces, and reopen the Mediterranean Sea for large conventional naval forces. But the deeper you dug, the stranger it seemed. It was not clear what had caused the study of such an extraordinary design. Was it some strategic threat? The need to evaluate the limits of aerospace technology? Or was Lockheed just keeping its summer interns busy? What was clear was that there were many unanswered questions, not just technical and engineering, but basic questions, such as how would fighter aircraft be rearmed during war? Or how would they dock with the large wake turbulence coming from the carrier's wings? Without Lockheed's actual report, we may never get answers. In the context of the Cold War, the 1201 was just one of hundreds of extremely speculative designs, many of which were really to help find questions that hadn't been answered yet, rather than actually answering questions. But even among countless conceptual designs, the 1201 stands out as one of the most extraordinary designs ever created. Today, when we look toward the sky, the question is whether anyone can build such an aircraft. Technology has advanced, materials have improved, engines have become more powerful. But does anyone have the courage? Perhaps, somewhere, a successor to the CL-1201 is being built in some secret lab. We may never know, until that shadow appears in the sky. And then, it might be too late.